Iran's ambassador kicked out, the Revolutionary Guard to be listed as a terrorist organisation, and the Defence Minister makes a dash to the White House. It was a defining week for the Albanese government's foreign policy stance as it adopts a much harder line with an adversary and seeks to lock in its main ally. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. For the past 2 years, the government's resisted calls to list Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organisation. It wanted to keep diplomatic channels with the regime open, but all that changed on Monday when ASIO advised Iran was behind at least 2 violent anti-Semitic attacks on Australian soil. The ambassador was swiftly told to pack his bags and by the end of the week was gone, along with 3 other diplomats. The Revolutionary Guard will now be listed. Its efforts to harm Jewish Australians and sow division here described as crossing an unforgivable line. But the opposition says action should have been taken much earlier.
Iran's ambassador has been expelled and Australian diplomats evacuated from Tehran.
ASIO and the federal government have declared Iran responsible for at least
2 anti-Semitic attacks on Australian soil.
These were extraordinary and dangerous acts of aggression orchestrated by a foreign nation.
This tore at our social fabric.
And that is why we have declared Iran's ambassador to Australia persona non grata.
I love, Australian people. I love Australian people.
Australia's diplomatic relationship with Iran all but severed.
The motivation for the attacks, ASIO says, fracturing Australian society and isolating Jewish Australians.
Iran and its proxies literally and figuratively lit the matches and fanned the flames.
They have sought to harm and terrify Jewish Australians and to sow hatred and division in our community.
These acts of egregious foreign interference are brazen attempts to cleave apart our social cohesion.
The IRGC used a complex web of proxies to hide its involvement.
Hiding within a global web of criminal connections, organising and funding the attacks.
The government will legislate so that we can list the IRGC as a terrorist organisation.
We are entirely united behind the measures announced today to expel the Iranian ambassador and list the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organisation.
We demanded action 2.5 years ago.
When confronting hatred, it is much better for us to point the finger less and bring each other closer more.
We've got to all come together.
And this government did nothing.
For over 2 years, the government's ignored warnings from the Persian community, the Jewish community and the coalition about Iran. Firebombings and terror were the result.
What we're seeing here is a political response which is entirely inappropriate.
Iran's ambassador is at Sydney Airport, moments away from leaving the country.
Ambassador, how do you feel being expelled from Australia?
Nothing in particular, part of the job.
This was an attack on Australian soil orchestrated by a foreign power. Completely unacceptable.
Baseless accusations.
My guest this morning is the Shadow Attorney-General Julian Leeser. First, let's check what's making news. A deal to deport former immigration detainees to Nauru has won support from the coalition but condemnation from human rights groups and the Greens. The deal, which will cost Australian taxpayers more than $400 million up front and then $70 million a year, was signed by Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke in Nauru on Friday. It will allow Australia to deport up to 280 members of the so-called NZYQ cohort, including convicted criminals. Opposition leader Susan Lee has warned violence and racism have no place in Australia ahead of anti-immigration marches planned across the country today. The protests have been linked to neo-Nazi groups. The government's also warned there is no place for any type of hate. And the Trump administration has barred Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas from attending next month's UN General Assembly in New York. Australia, Canada, France and the UK are set to recognise a Palestinian state at the UN, and Anthony Albanese was planning on meeting Abbas, who typically attends the General Assembly. Well, there's no doubt the government acted swiftly after receiving ASIO's advice on Monday morning about Iran. The National Security Committee of Cabinet was convened. The urgent priority, evacuating Australian embassy staff in Tehran before they could face any retaliation. And by midnight, they were out of the country. The next day, Iran's ambassador was given his marching orders. His removal went smoothly too. All of this had bipartisan support, but that didn't stop another political brawl over whether action should have been taken much earlier. Let's see what the panel makes of it. We're joined this week by Laura Tingle, Paul, Sakkal and Samantha Maiden. Very good morning to all of you. We'll get to the politics of all of this shortly, but Laura, let's start with what ASIO concluded, or at least what we know. This is one of those cases where they don't lay everything out publicly on the table, but from what we understand, they have found against Iran. What is it, and how does it compare to what we know of Iran's activities in other countries?
Well, the findings against the Revolutionary Guard, which is a particular part of the security apparatus in Iran, and of course Mike Burgess, the head of ASIO, had identified Iran as a malevolent player for the last couple of years. And it's interesting when you look back at what he had to say in the assessment, the National Security Assessment earlier this year, where he was musing about, where is an attack on a synagogue terrorism, where do you draw all these lines, which is interesting because it sounds like they were already thinking along these lines. Now, it fits in very clearly with a pattern of behaviour around the world. There's, very extensive documentation about the role of the Revolutionary Guard in attacking both the Iranian diaspora and Jewish sites around the world. And of course, Kylie Moore-Gilbert, who was detained in Iran, has said through the week that she was actually asked about Australian Jewish sites while she was in detention. So there's a really long path here. The question is, exactly how did they find out? Now, what they're saying is that most of this was done by Australian security agencies, and at the edge there was some assistance from,
another party.
Other parties, which one can speculate about, but clearly this is something that they've been thinking about for some time.
Yeah, look, my understanding is the Federal Police, who were also part of this investigation, certainly were able to track it to a foreign actor, a criminal actor, and then ASIO were able to get in and find the link to Iran, or Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Here's how the ASIO boss, Mike Burgess, described it.
It's a layer cake of cutouts between IRGC and the person or the alleged perpetrators conducting crimes. The IRGC used a complex web of proxies to hide its involvement.
I guess, Paul, a question a lot of people have is why? Why would Iran want to target Australia in this way? And aren't these sort of attacks only going to engender sympathy towards the Israeli and Jewish cause?
Yeah, I think it's a complex question. There's not one clear motive. And if you read Iran scholars and experts analysing these events this week, they say that there's a split inside the regime between pragmatists who want to start dealing with the EU on a new nuclear deal. They're trying to ensure that there's no 2015 UN-style sanctions brought back on Iran. They want to normalise relationships with the West. Then there's the Islamists who believe that Iran should be a disruptive force, who want to use asymmetric warfare to project power into the West, both to contest the US and just the Western rules-based order, but also just to intimidate Jewish people because that is their raison d'etre. They are a global anti-Jewish force. And this is, there's a big question as to whether the Israeli attacks on the IRGC in recent months, which have taken out a lot of their leaders, which Australia was not very equivocal or unequivocal in supporting. We were pretty reluctant to back those attacks. Might have actually cut the heads off the guys who might have orchestrated this attack on the hard line of the Iranian regime.
Yeah, it's worth remembering these attacks. We're talking about the Adass Synagogue and the Lewis Continental Kitchen were before the Israeli strikes and the US strikes to take out Iran's nuclear program. Sam, when we look at the government reaction this week, as I say, after getting this advice from ASIO Monday morning, they did react swiftly. The ambassador's now gone. They're in the process of changing the law to list the Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organisation. What's the significance of these steps?
Well, I mean, it's only a couple of years ago that, you know, Penny Wong and the then Attorney-General pushed back at the idea of listing them as a terror organisation, and there was a couple of reasons for that. One was DFAT wanted to keep, you know, the lines of communication open. There was always this idea that because the US wasn't there, that perhaps we could open communication channels. But there was also legal advice from the Attorney-General's Department because the IGRC was an agent of the government, that it wasn't covered by our criminal code. Now, the Coalition and people that have been calling for this action to be taken for a very long time made the point that there was an easy fix to that, and that's exactly, you know, the fix that Tony Burke is basically going to take.
Yeah, that's changing the law so that they can list it. I mean, this argument that they should have done it earlier, Tony Burke had this to say.
As of yesterday, we have a foreign government engaging in an attack on our soil. That is of a completely different order to anything that was in front of us 2 years ago.
Laura, I don't think that's entirely fair, though. I mean, like, there was evidence that they were intimidating their own, you know, diaspora in Australia. Yeah.
But it is a very different thing, though, to be found by ASIO to have carried out attacks, violent attacks on Australian soil. What do you think of this argument about, well, they should have done this earlier?
Look, you can always argue about it. I mean, I think the Coalition's position on this has been a bit all over the joint, frankly, and I think we saw that from Andrew Hastie through the week. You know, the question of what they could or should have done, it goes back even further than 2 years in terms of listing the Revolutionary Guard.
Just explain that to people, because he was the head of the Intelligence Committee when the Coalition was in government.
That's right, and he was sort of musing on the radio about, well, you know, of course, you know, I would have liked us to have done that when we were in government, but we sort of couldn't really get that happening. So, you know, and there are these two separate things. There is the listing, and there are these legal issues about, well, it's part of the government, but, you know, the second step is, you know, actually throwing out the ambassador, who they keep insisting had nothing to do with any of this. So it really is an escalation. And of course, this is against the backdrop of, you know, the hardliners taking a bigger role in the Iranian government, you know, just in the last few months. You know, the more moderate foreign minister left his post in March. So that sort of harder line group that Paul's talking about is sort of much more dominant, I think, there now.
And just on this question of what a listing 2 years ago would have done to prevent these attacks, I mean, it's obviously open to the Coalition. They called for it 2 years ago. Labor's now doing it. They're obviously going to claim that as a win, but it's really unclear how listing them would have done anything. Yeah. And it's worth just thinking about what listing means. It means that if you're a local supporter of the IRGC, you can be prosecuted under terror laws. Most of the Iranian community in Australia left after the revolution and have no sympathy towards the Iranian regime. The actual incidents we're talking about, the arson attack in Sydney and Melbourne, were perpetrated by people at the bottom of a very long chain that ends up with someone in Iran who knows the motive. And at the very bottom, these are people who are using what's been described to me as the Uber Eats app of criminality. It's a special app that you download if you're in a criminal network. It's all encrypted. You see a job come up, it says firebomb synagogue, X amount of money. You take the job. You don't know who's above you. You definitely don't know who's above that. So it seems unlikely, and I've talked to authorities about this, there is a sense that there may not be many people even on Australian soil who know who the orchestrating actors were. Although, having said that, they're still looking for the third, or they know, there's a strong sense that they know who the third arsonist is in Indepth. They haven't made that arrest yet, and there is hope in Australian authorities that that third arsonist has more information about the chain to Iran.
Because it's significant, I think, that the charges that have come from these cases have generally been about, you know, criminal ones. I think a terror charge was added to one of the cases more recently, but most of it has just essentially reflected the nature of the criminals for hire, rather than the fact that that they were people anywhere in the chain low down who were actually linked to an ideological view.
The people who've perpetrated these attacks are like young guys from the west of Melbourne. They're not ideologically motivated terrorists.
That's not to say, as the authorities and the government have stressed, that that's the case for all of the anti-Semitic attacks we've seen.
No, some of, I mean, the Dural caravan incident, which is the most high-profile one, that's been ruled out. That is not linked to foreign interference. That was done by criminals who were trying to get out of another...
Trying to get a better negotiation.
Trying to get a better deal. There are also some graffitis and other incidents which were perpetrated by left-wing pro-Palestinian activists. There are more, we don't know how many yet, that were directed by Iran, and then there are some other ones which are unclear. So there's a mix here.
Yeah, all right. Well, time to talk to the Shadow Attorney-General Julian Leeser. To take us there, here's what he said on the day of the Adass Israel synagogue attack.
The most important thing that we can do is actually to change the government of the country at the coming federal election, because this government has been appalling. In my view, there is a direct line between the government's position at the United Nations, changing our votes and abandoning Israel, and the arsonists' views here.
Julian Leeser, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you, David.
So you called this a terrorist attack on the day. You directly linked it to the Albanese government's position at the United Nations. ASIO now says it was Iran that was responsible. Were you wrong to rush to judgment?
No, David, I don't think I was. This was a terrorist attack in my view. As we found out, it's a terrorist attack that's been propagated by Iran. What has Iran's objective in its operations in Australia been? To cause division, to cause fear in the Jewish community and in the Persian community, and to move Australia away from its traditional allies and security partners, the United States and Israel, on the global stage. What we've seen this week in the decision to list the IRGC and to expel the ambassador was the right move, but it was the right move 2.5 years too late. We have seen Iran orchestrate an attack on Australians on Australian soil, a series of attacks. The Adass Israel synagogue arson attack occurred while there were people in that synagogue. Australians could have been killed. I visited that synagogue. It is one of the most heart-wrenching occasions in my life, seeing the twisted metal of the chairs and furniture that were burned, seeing the Torah ark that was there hollowed out, seeing the memories of a community desecrated. We've seen it in the Lewis Deli as well in Bondi, and we know that there are further activities that Iran has been involved in. Our problem as the coalition was that we were calling on the government to list the IRGC 2.5 years ago. They had a report from a Senate committee. It's clear from FOI that Home Affairs were preparing to list, and Claire O'Neill, the then Home Affairs Minister, in February 2023 gave a very significant speech where she called out foreign interference by Iran in this country, where she talked about the way in which ASIO had detected and disrupted a foreign interference operation that included surveillance of Iranian Australians and their families. The government was well and truly on notice to do this 2.5 years ago. And my problem with the government is every time they've been asked to do something in relation to improving our security, particularly in relation to the Jewish community, they have been dragging the chain.
But you went a lot further than that at the time, as we just heard. You said, in my view, there is a direct line between the government's position at the United Nations and the arsonists' fuse. Where is the evidence of that?
Well, I think when you create a situation where you delegitimise the Jewish state, which is what the government has been doing in relation to a series of its votes at the United Nations, you delegitimise Jewish people here, and you create an atmosphere where low-life criminals are prepared to take money from an organisation backed ultimately by the Iranian regime to commit crimes against Jewish people.
So you think the people who actually were responsible for the arson attack drew inspiration from the Albanese government's position? Is that your suggestion?
No, I'm not saying that, David. I'm saying that when you create an atmosphere where you delegitimise the Jewish state, you ultimately delegitimise the Jewish people and make it acceptable for people to think, oh, well, why don't I go and firebomb a synagogue?
You don't think this was more to do with them being paid as criminals to carry out an attack that was orchestrated by Iran? That's what ASIO says.
Well, you can be paid to do something, but you hope some people have a line in the sand, and you think perhaps something's more acceptable if an atmosphere has been created in a community where the Jewish community has been, as it were, isolated, and the Jewish state has been isolated. So
if the Albanese government had a different vote at the UN, you think these alleged criminals, these young men, wouldn't have done it?
David, what we've seen since the election of the Albanese government is a great change in policy in relation to Israel. We saw it a year before the October 7 terrorist attacks, when the Albanese government changed the position in a very ham-fisted way on the capital of Israel.
I understand all of that. Just to back to the question, though, you honestly still think the Albanese government wears blame for the Adass synagogue attack?
Well, the Albanese government wears blame for not having acted quickly enough in relation to the listing of the IRGC and in doing everything it can to protect Jewish Australians.
OK. Let's turn to whether this could have been prevented had it been listed earlier, the IRGC. We heard the ASIO boss. He says a complex web of proxies were used to hide Iran's involvement. Even if it had been listed as a terrorist organisation, would that have made any difference if those on the ground had no idea who was behind it?
Well, listing terrorist organisations does a few things. Firstly, it says that one should have nothing to do with a particular terrorist organisation. Secondly, and the fact that the terrorist organisation has been listed may well degrade its operations in a particular country. And it says that one shouldn't associate with terrorist organisations because that in of itself becomes a crime, and that you shouldn't finance or accept finance from terrorist organisations. The point of listing the IRGC in 2023 was that we'd had representations from the Persian community. People forget that there were tens of thousands of Persian Australians and Australians on the streets protesting human rights abuses in Iran. They forget that there was a Senate committee. They forget that Claire O'Neill was taking steps and her department were taking steps to list the IRGC at that time. The fact that the IRGC was not listed, I think, was the wrong decision.
And you said during the week you were incandescent with fury about Labor's dragging its heels on listing the IRGC. How do you feel about your own side of politics, the coalition also resisting calls to list the Revolutionary Guard when it was in power?
Well, David, when we were in power, we began listing the Iran proxies. We listed Hamas and Hezbollah in full. But the Mahsa Amini murder changed everything because it brought tens of thousands of Iranians onto the streets, Iranian Australians onto the streets. It sparked the Senate committee inquiry, which saw recommendations for the listing of the IRGC as a terrorist organisation. It saw calls by me as the then Shadow Attorney-General to say that we would support changes to the law to assist the government.
I appreciate that, but I'm talking about earlier, when the coalition was in government. I mean, Andrew Hastie's talked about his view as the chair of the Intelligence Committee at the time. He wanted the coalition to list it. Kylie Moore-Gilbert too. She spent, of course, 2 years in jail in Iran. She's criticised what she says is an attempt to politicise this. Now, here's what she posted during the week, saying that the coalition government failed to prescribe the Revolutionary Guard. She says, I was taken hostage by the IRGC and brought home, all under the coalition. Not a single sanction has ever been applied over my wrongful arrest. Why didn't the coalition take any action after Kylie Moore-Gilbert suggested it?
Well, we did take the action in relation to the other Iran proxies, but the real change, as I said,
not the IRGC.
David, well, the real change in relation to the IRGC occurred as a result of the Mahsa Amini murders and the protests that we saw here, and the fear of the Iranian community. I mean, I represent the 4th largest Persian community in the country. I remember having meetings in my office where they would bring telephone books with people's sized documents with people's photographs on them showing people that had been disappeared by the regime. I had Claire Chandler, who ran that Senate committee, doing a function in my electorate for the Iranian community, and I had people telling me that they were not prepared to attend the function because they were concerned about IRCG agents and people from the embassy who might be spying on them and might interfere with their lives and their families.
So you have no criticism of your own side for ignoring Andrew Hastie, Kylie Moore-Gilbert and others when it had the chance?
Well, my view is that the Mahsa Amini thing changed everything. Okay. It's not as if we didn't do anything. We listed Hamas and Hezbollah. They are the other Iranian proxies in this country while we were in government.
Let me turn to the war in Gaza, Julian Leeser. I understand your criticism of Hamas and Hezbollah, the Iranian proxies. We've heard that regularly. Do you have any criticism, though, of Israel and how it's conducted itself in this war?
Well, I want to say a couple of matters of principle. I think the first thing is that, like all Australians, I'm distressed by the images that we continue to see coming out of Gaza. I want to see this war end. I want to see the aid get through. I want to see the hostages released. And and I want to see a lasting peace in the Middle East. Israel, like Australia, is a Western liberal democratic country. It's the only democracy in the Middle East. It has free and fair elections, it has a robust judiciary, it has freedom of the press, it respects the rights of women and LGBTI minorities. Hamas, by contrast, is a terrorist organisation that we list as a terrorist organisation in this country. It is sponsored by Iran, the same Iran that launched attacks on Australia and Australians. I want to see this war end, I want to see this come to an end, but the ball is in Hamas's court to release the hostages. That is the key thing that needs to occur for this conflict to be brought to an end.
You said you're concerned about the images. Some of those images during the past week have seen the striking of a hospital, the Nasser hospital, more than 20 people killed there. Benjamin Netanyahu called it a tragic mishap. Susan Lee called it absolutely horrific. What would you call that one incident?
I would say it's a tragedy, and Israel owned up to the tragedy, and they're launching an investigation, and that's the appropriate thing to do.
On a couple of other matters, marches against mass migration are planned across the country today, and some far-right neo-Nazi groups are getting involved. You've criticised some of the pro-Palestinian marches. What about this one? Should it go ahead or should it be banned?
Well, David, I'll say a couple of things. The first thing is, in relation to those pro-Palestinian marches that occurred recently, I can accept that there are Australians of goodwill who went along to those marches because they wanted to see an end to the suffering. But among the people who were at the marches were people calling for intifada, who were holding up pictures of the Ayatollah, who were holding terrorist flags. At the protest that's occurring today, there are people there of goodwill who want to change policies in relation to this country. But I'd say to them, be careful of the company you keep. I've seen some of the material for that particular protest, and I am really concerned about the anti-Indian sentiment that's been expressed and some of the anti-Semitic undertones of some of those protests. And I'd say to Australians, be careful of the company you keep.
The Home Affairs Minister visited Nauru on Friday, signed a deal there to transfer several hundred of the former immigration detainees known as the NZYQ cohort to the tiny Pacific island. It's going to cost Australian taxpayers $400 million up front and $70 million ongoing each year. Does the Coalition support this sort of deal?
Well, look, this all comes out of the NZYQ cohort. This was a case that was entirely foreseeable, and yet the government really didn't foresee it. These people have no right to remain in Australia. They have exhausted all their avenues of appeal. They can no longer be detained indefinitely as a result of the High Court's decision. And so they can't be repatriated to their country of origin, and so they can be repatriated to a third country. And I think it's important that they are repatriated to a third country.
So you're okay with this arrangement?
Well, this is a sort of legitimate arrangement. The only reason that people can remain in Australia, and this is very well established under the migration law of this country, is if they're an Australian citizen or if they're on a valid visa. If they're not on a valid visa, then the Migration Act directs migration officials to remove them as soon as possible. Yeah, these people are some of the most violent criminals in this cohort, including murderers, including rapists, including child sex offenders. And since some of them have been released, they have reoffended. And the Minister has not used the preventative detention orders that he had enacted earlier in the piece, and we want him to use those orders.
Yeah, given their record and the seriousness of this, is a country with only a population of about 12,000 people really able to deal with that?
Well, that's a matter for the government of Nauru to assess as to whether this is the right arrangement for them. But I'm interested in what's the right arrangement for Australia, and the right arrangement for Australia is that these people no longer be in the country.
Part of this also involves the government passing legislation to allow their removal. It includes removing their right to procedural fairness. Are you okay with this? Is the Coalition going to pass this waiving of natural justice for this cohort?
We're working through this legislation through our processes, but I will say this. This cohort of people have had ample opportunities to put their case. They have exhausted all appeal avenues, and the question now is whether they can be removed to another country. The removal is not usually a process which requires them to put forward arguments against that removal. They have made their arguments previously, some on many occasions, about why they deserve to remain in this country, and those arguments have all been rejected.
A final one, Julian Leeser, is one of the few remaining Liberals to hold a metropolitan seat in the country. Do you support the net zero emissions target?
Well, I've long been on the public record as a supporter of the net zero target, but Susan Lee has set up a process for us to look at our energy policy, and that's what we're going to do. We're going through that process. I think out of the process, I want to see a target that reduces emissions. I want to see a policy that reduces prices because Australian businesses and families are struggling. And I want to see something that increases reliability so our economy can grow. We're not going to be in government for the next 3 years. And during that time, we are already seeing emissions go up under Labor, prices go up, and reliability go down, and that needs to be the focus of our discussions on these issues.
And are you in the camp that says you've got to make a decision on net zero quickly, as in this year, or are you relaxed about taking your time?
I think we need to let the process take its course. I've got great confidence in my colleague Dan Tan and in Susan Lee, and I know they're going to run a good process.
Julian Leeser, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, David.
And we will come back to that coalition debate over net zero. First, let's bring the panel back in. Laura Tingle, Paul Sakkal and Sam Maiden. Just quickly, Laura, back on the Iran issue. Julian Leeser is still laying at least some blame on the government's feet here for creating an environment where it's acceptable to carry out attacks like this.
Yes, that was interesting. This idea that this delegitimised the State of Israel. Can we just remember what the UN resolution was in December 2024? It was calling on Israel to get out of the illegally occupied parts of Palestine, in Gaza and the West Bank. I don't know why that's delegitimising. So, he's still taking a pretty hard line on this. And that's at a time when I think opinion about Israel and the state of its democracy has changed quite harshly around the world, not just in Australia, because of its actions in Gaza in particular, but also in terms of settlements in the West Bank.
Paul, let's move to this Nauru deal. We've done deals with Nauru over many years when it comes to resettling asylum seekers, but here we are talking about this NZYQ cohort. After a High Court decision, former detainees, many with criminal convictions, that the government's been struggling to deal with. So the deal, Tony Burke went over to Nauru on Friday, and this agreement, he met the President, he met the entire Parliament, which is 19 people, and signed this MOU. It says it'll resettle people who have no legal right to stay in Australia, and it will allow the continued management of the NZYQ cohort. Comes with quite a price tag, though.
Huge price tag. We were just in the pre-show looking up the Nauruan GDP, which we found was $160 million US. So it's a big payday.
This is a $400 million
This is $400 million in the first year, and then from the second year on, $70 million each year. So it's a huge amount of money. It's not really clear what the money will be used for. This was a real cloak and dagger mission by Tony Burke.
Yeah, explain how it came to light.
So we had Parliament on Thursday, and I'm not actually sure when he flew. It was either Thursday night or Friday morning. But he was in Nauru on Friday, so I imagine he left straight after Parliament. He met with David Adiang, the new president. He has a long-running relationship with David Adiang. Burke was the immigration minister when Adiang was the justice minister in 2013. Then around the middle of the day on Friday, there was a statement uploaded to the Home Affairs website, not emailed to journalists in the normal way, which made vague allusions to a deal with the Nauruan government, didn't have much detail around it. David Adiang on the same day spoke in the Parliament. They don't have a functioning Hansard, so it was not easy to get onto a transcript of his comments, and he laid out in more detail what the deal entailed. But the government's not said much about it publicly. I mean, the comments from Murray Watt today on your competitor program were really the first time the government's spoken about it in detail. So done in quite an unorthodox way.
Yeah, Murray Watt on Sky this morning said it would involve several hundred. We know the cohort's around 280. The Greens clearly aren't happy with this.
This is another secret deal, this time a $400 million secret deal that Labor's signed with Nauru to literally turn Nauru into a 21st century prison colony.
The coalition...
They'd never do that in Australia.
No, well, that's right. The coalition, as we heard from Julian Leeser, seem to be fine with this arrangement. But Sam, it's only a tiny place, 12,000 people.
Well, there's sort of two aspects to that. I mean, one is if you actually put 280 people into a community that's 12,000, I mean, that's not insignificant. It's a pretty big influx of people.
And not just any old people.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, obviously the government has made some sort of call that these people are a risk to our community, but it's worth paying them to be sent somewhere else. And, you know, look, the bottom line is even from the cost, I mean, this is back really to the days of when we put people in PNG, because if you think $400 million up front, $70 million a year, you're only talking about 280 people going there, and it won't be that many in the beginning either. You're looking at spending about $1 million per person. So that's a lot of coin to spend to get someone who's been convicted of a crime here that is politically unsavoury at home and just ship them somewhere else.
Laura, you've watched these Pacific solutions over many years. How does this one sit?
I was trying to remember how much the Paladin contracts were worth. Yeah,
$2 billion or something.
Yeah, over a long period of time. But I think they were sort of similar.
Yeah, I feel like it was like about 500,000 per detainee a year or something. I mean, don't quote me on that, but it's off the top of my head. Yeah.
Well, nobody else is going to quote you since you're on national television.
Correct.
But yeah, look, it is fascinating that they've been so quiet about it. You know, I suppose I was thinking last night, if this was the coalition, I think the politics around it would have been incredibly different. There would have been marching bands and fireworks to announce this, I think. So I think the fact that the government's sort of trying not to talk about it is
a good point.
Interesting.
And I wonder if any of those fresh faces in the 94, is it, no, well, once you include the Senate, even bigger, Labor caucus, not a peep from...
Yeah, I mean, like in the Howard years, eventually, you know, there were people, including Petro Georgiou, that raised concerns about detention. But it'd be interesting to see with that huge backbench if a similar problem arises.
And I suppose one other thing about this is all those Pacific solutions were all supposed to be about a deterrent effect. Now, you can't really deter people, you know, in this particular category, even if there were some more people who had been convicted of things, because, you know, that's a completely different process. So it is quite a different incarceration thing where you're talking about basically perpetual incarceration. It's just a question of deciding to do it for a group of people who have, you know, served their time and got out, which a lot of Australian criminals have done, but we're not
and as the
getting rid of all of them.
would often say after this whole thing blew up, there's always a recidivism rate amongst ex-cons, and it's not going to be any different with this cohort. Anyway, they've worked out a way to get rid of them. Let's turn to the Defence Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles and his somewhat curious trip to Washington. So just to recap, it was a quick trip. The plan, as I understand it, was always that he was going to meet Pete Hegseth and JD Vance, the Vice President. The PM signed off on that basis. And he did. He got over there and he met the Vice President. He met Pete Hegseth. He met Marco Rubio. He met Stephen Miller, which is important as well. He's the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, very close to Trump, very influential. So, you know, he had the top access, no doubt about it. But for a while there, it was unclear whether he would get a meeting with Hegseth, the Defence Secretary. And then after he did have a brief 10 minutes with him, the Pentagon put out this line, Paul, saying it was not a meeting, it was a happenstance encounter. Before then, some hours later, clarifying, no, it was a meeting, it was all good. What was going on there?
Yeah, well, that initial Pentagon statement fed into this parliamentary sitting day meeting trivia. Was it a meeting? Was it not a meeting? What was it? I mean, they eventually clarified the statement and said it was a meeting. He rocked up for 15 or 20 minutes to one of the other meetings that Marles had. Part of the reason for the confusion was that there was this very, very long Trump cabinet meeting on that day.
And very strange cabinet meeting. Very strange. 3.5 hours broadcast live.
So
grovelling.
Yeah, it was quite funny. Hegseth obviously had to be there, which meant that he couldn't have a normal length meeting. But for the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister to meet with the two I see who might well replace Trump, the very, very powerful Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, the National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and Hegseth in the 1 week, is quite a strong argument for the government to say they are doing pretty well and that the ambassador's working his contacts pretty well in Washington. And just quickly on what I've heard from the meetings, I've been told that there were positive noises from every one of the 4 individuals who met with Kevin Rudd and Richard Marles.
About AUKUS and about a Trump meeting?
The Trump meeting is not yet locked in, but this was part of the reason for this meeting was to clear the path for it. There is hope that it happens around the UN meeting in mid-September, but still not yet locked in and hard to pin Trump down. But positive noises about AUKUS and a growing confidence inside our government that the Elbridge-Colby review is something on the fringes of the administration, not at the centre of it.
I mean, yeah, when you look at it, Sam, and you see that Pentagon line that it was a happenstance encounter, and you know, Elbridge-Colby, we know, has issues with AUKUS and is reviewing it, you think something's going on at the Pentagon where they're not happy. Ultimately, that may not matter. It's going to be a Trump call, right? On
yeah, I mean, the view in the Albanese government and the view in the Australian Embassy in Washington is that despite all the colour and movement of, you know, the media reporting, that they think things are going very well. Why? Because we've got the lowest tariffs. We're not being publicly humiliated by Trump in press conferences. Like, it's an interesting bar to judge it against. Sure, it was a bit embarrassing when Hexas is putting out, or the Pentagon is putting out these statements, but they kind of believe that they've got this strategy with the Trump administration, which is essentially to not poke the bear. So sometimes when, like, clearly the Prime Minister now needs to have a meeting with Trump, there's no question of that. But there has been, I think, concern in the lead up to have a meeting without a clear agenda, or whether there's unpredictability in where it could go, could be very dangerous. And that obviously fed into what the reluctance to try and get a meeting before or during the election. And then, you know, events have kind of overtaken it. Not suggesting that it's been some strategic piece of genius, far from it, but, you know, there is a strategy there that they are adopting. And despite, you know, all the journalists clamouring and asking questions about when the meeting is, they're kind of happy with the way.
Yeah, I mean, Laura, it may be just the chaos of the Trump administration that explains some of the confusion around what happened. But when you look at who he met with, and as I mentioned, Stephen Miller in particular, that they're pretty good signs, right, that we're going to get a meeting with Trump.
Well, I mean, I've got to say, you know, I sort of think not meeting with Trump, as Sam says, has been working pretty well so far. I really don't think they're too fussed about that. At some point he will have to meet with him. But I think the fact that there is now sort of a more of a focus on establishing relationships with these other figures in the administration. I mean, JD Vance and Marco Rubio could well be a joint ticket if we actually have another election in the United States. And you know, they were both, as senators, signatories to signing up to the AUKUS deal. I've got to say I remain incredibly sceptical about, you know, based on the Congressional Research Service's own research, that the US can deliver us any Virginia-class submarines. I find it a little bit bizarre that, you know, there is so much confidence about this, which they're certainly sort of continuing to say, no, look, it's all ridgy-dig. There might be a bit of flutter around the Colby report, but nothing really terrible. So I just think that, you know, the government's looking at entrenching relationships with all of these other characters in the administration, and just trying to keep their heads down as much as possible with Donald Trump.
But they've got to bite the bullet and have that meeting.
Well, yeah.
But I think there's a real concern with AUKUS that they will end up in a situation where the US just doesn't have subs to spare, and that we'll end up with US subs in Australia under a US flag.
That's actually sort of not the worst outcome. I mean, they're producing sort of about one Virginia-class submarine a year at the moment. That's going to be even further sort of challenged by them bringing on their higher priority class submarines, other class submarines in the next couple of years. There really is a serious question about whether there are going to be any submarines about. And I find it a bit disturbing that while the government has changed its position on the United States, like everybody else in the world, and gone, hey, these guys aren't completely reliable, where do we get the momentum to have a serious plan B that doesn't involve any sorts of Virginia-class submarines?
I think worth saying that when we talk about confidence inside the Australian government on AUKUS, it's confidence on the political decision-making in the administration, not confidence on the actual details of AUKUS.
Of the outcome.
And everybody likes to flick straight to the Pillar 2 stuff rather than talk about the submarines.
No one knows what Pillar 2 is.
A couple of other things, that net zero argument within the coalition that's been going since the election, it flared again this week in the party room, or the party rooms, both the Liberal Party room and then the coalition joint party room meeting. Essentially, the debate is whether the coalition needs to hurry up and make a decision quickly or can wait. Julian Leeser seemed happy to wait for the Dantean process to run its course. Others, however, are in more of a hurry.
I do think the government is going to lay out its policy on the 2035 targets before COP. It has to do that. And so we have to take a position on those targets. That's just not a, if but or maybe, we've got to take a position on it. That's a debate that the government is going to trigger, and we have to come to a position on it.
Paul, Dantean has said that his working group process could take 9 to 12 months. I understand Susan Lee didn't necessarily tell him to say that, but but clearly there are some who are happy enough for him to take his time. What do you think? Do they need to hurry this up?
Probably. I mean, Angus Taylor won't say when interviewed on this that I think he was the energy minister when Scott Morrison signed up to net zero. Am I wrong on that? I think he was.
Yes, he would have been. Yeah.
The Liberals, so there was a party room meeting earlier this week, and in the joint party room meeting with the Nationals, there was a clear strategy from some on the right of the Liberal Party, as well as in the Nats with Matt Canavan and co, to say we need a joint party room meeting to settle this issue once and for all. This has made Liberals, particularly on the moderate side, absolutely furious because it recalls memories of Tony Abbott's move to effectively ambush the Liberal Party in 2015, bring all the Conservative and often Catholic nationals into the room to settle the issue of same-sex marriage. That was a moment when Christopher Pyne said Tony Abbott lost the leadership. It was a really, really crucial moment in that administration, and Liberals are saying privately that they are not going to have this joint party room with the Nats to let them ambush a Liberal Party decision-making process.
Which is fair. You can see their position on that, but dragging this out for 12 months is painful.
I think there's a growing view, even in the Liberal Party, that this needs to be sorted, but no one knows how to sort it. I mean, you've got Andrew Hastie and Michaela Cash who are anti-net zero.
But if you drag it out, you just have people declaring that it'll just...
Tell you what, at the end of the day, if the Nats end up saying no to net zero and the Libs still want to stick with it, can they stick together?
It's not clear, and there is a growing view inside the Liberal Party that maybe it wouldn't have been so bad if they did split. That's becoming more of a accepted possibility.
Is it complete hiding? I mean, like, one wonders why we actually take these issues seriously. I mean, what do they actually even mean by dumping net zero? What does that actually represent to them now? I mean, the electorate, it's not just that the electorate sort of basically decimated them with these sorts of policies last time around, but net zero, when Barnaby Joyce started talking about this, was sort of on the basis of the $100 baked dinners. Most people's experience of renewables is not that it's cost them more, it's possibly cost them less. The basic underlying sort of rationale beyond the ideological one is sort of completely barking.
And power prices have gone up, but of course you'd argue that the other alternatives, new coal-fired power or some other alternatives.
They haven't had an alternative. They don't have
You can also take your kind of clues from the fact that the Albanese government essentially said to them, clear the decks, give them the floor of Parliament.
Have your debate.
Go for your life.
No,
Final one.
We've got it again tomorrow.
Bob Katter, in case you missed it, he fired up the other day and threatened a journalist. He was actually talking about the marches that are happening today and how he's going to get involved in these anti-immigration rallies. When Channel 9's Josh Bavis asked, I thought it was a perfectly reasonable question about, well, what about your own heritage here, Bob Katter? His grandfather came from Lebanon, and here's what followed.
Bob, you've got Lebanese heritage yourself. What would you say?
Oh, mate, don't say that, because that irritates me, and I punch blokes in the mouth for saying that. You're a racist. You cannot say what you've just said without being identified as a racist.
Sam, what happened there? What's going on?
Well, I think the behaviour was clearly unacceptable, and everybody has said that. But I suppose I was just more interested this week in unpacking the why, and I think the why is quite complex for Bob Katter. And the reason why, as I understand it, he's very sensitive about these issues is. He's very deeply affected by the death of his mother in his 20s, a lady called Mabel Horn. He cared for her at home while his dad, who was a politician, continued to sort of travel, to Canberra. And he's always thought that her influence on his life was as greater than his father's. And so when there's always this focus on his father and not on his mother, it just kind of rips up all of these family wounds. And even his son, Robbie Cat, has said that he can't even talk about his mum, that there's such a... It's just a lot of, you know,
look,
emotional things.
Sure, there's personal issues there, but threatening to punch a journalist who's asking what I thought was an entirely reasonable question and handled himself very calmly, I thought, through all of that. I saw Jane Hume is now saying this is going to no doubt go to the Independent Parliamentary Standards Commission, which I had a quick check of what that covers, and it does cover assault, bullying, harassment, including at events like that.
Yeah, right.
Is this going to go further, do you think, Paul?
Oh, I didn't know that people were suggesting it should go to the IPSC. I mean, some in the Liberal Party have worries about that agency because they believe it kind of might have an unconstitutional element to it to start policing politicians who should be judged
I think if it's assault, they should make a report to the police, surely.
And,
but,
I mean, there's been people this week say that, this guy shouldn't be in Parliament, is clearly not of sound mind, but that's for voters to decide. There's no constitutional test for being sound of mind, although there is something in the Electoral Act which says that if you cannot, can't make a proper decision to vote, you shouldn't be able to run for Parliament. But he's clearly not at that stage. I think some of the commentary has been harsh. Clearly unacceptable. He's an old, eccentric man. He's got a personal thing.
He's only 80, mate. He's not that old. You're making him sound like he's 102.
Joe Biden was only, 78?
Anyway,
he's fresh-faced.
I'm not sure if
80.
age is the issue here.
Yeah.
But, anyway, look, we'll see if it goes any further. We better move on. Our panel, Sam Maiden, Paul Sakkal, Laura Tingle, back in a moment with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures this morning with cartoonist and author Eleri Harris, and a warm welcome back.
Thank you.
ASIO revealed this week that the Iranians had directed some anti-Semitic attacks, which led to the ambassador being expelled from the country, something which apparently hasn't happened since the Second World War.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy out there news.
Yeah, it really was. Brett Lethbridge has picked up on Iran, the petroleum exporter, throwing the terror-lit torch on petrol here. Good to see Iran spending its money wisely.
I mean, what else are you going to spend your money on?
Yeah. This Mark Knight cartoon is an old trope, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's an Australian original trope, and this octopus is basically how you learn what racism was during the Second World War. But the original part here is the brave and bold ASIO employee here with the axe.
Mike Burgess, he's chopped off the Australia arm of Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, the Houthis and Hamas. I think they could just send it down to a South Australian beach and let it wither in the algal bloom. Kathy Wilcox. Turns out Iran was responsible for those anti-Semitic attacks on our soil.
Expel the ambassador. Brand the regime terrorists.
Yet another Palestinian hospital bombed by Israel. 20 civilians and journalists killed.
How many strongly worded statements will it take?
Yeah, there's a bit of an imbalance here, isn't there?
Just a tad, yeah.
Did you see Bob Katter's outrageous behaviour at a press conference in Brisbane?
It was pretty nuts. I think that Bob Katter has a really strong future as an ambassador to Iran.
Yeah, well, if we send him over there, they might leave us alone. Warren's drawn him here. If you're not out in 2 minutes, I'm cutting him loose outside the embassy of Iran. Mad as a Katter, they've titled it. Eleri, emissions targets were on the coalition's agenda this week. Barnaby Joyce, he was the hero of net zero as he introduced his repeal bill, which has no chance of getting up.
Zero for net zero.
Yeah, and this was during the debate.
I mean, I think this is actually a beautiful sequence because you've got the smirk, the smile, haha, and then the oh no, and then oh, and everyone's gone.
Yeah. Peter Brolman's in a bit of a purple patch. He's drawn the net zero elephant as the only thing in the room. So far, it's the only participant at the Nats debate net zero roundtable in Parliament House.
Yeah, I mean, Susan looks quite happy with that situation.
David Rowe has done some top-notch work here.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, at the net zero roundtable.
Yeah, and I really love, all of the looking in with the big smokestack here for nuclear.
I'll just leave you to it then, says Jim Chalmers. It's the old Napoleon quote, never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake.
No, just leave them be in their circle.
Eleri, when is a meeting not a meeting?
When it's a happy happenstance.
A happenstance. So Richard Marles was just wandering around the Pentagon.
And there just happened to be someone there to take some nice photos.
Dick, what are you doing here? Here he is with Deputy President Vance and the Secretary of Defence Hegseth.
standout for me this week was David Rowe, return to centre politics, as Jim is returning the inflation box, which seems to be floating.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister here is returning the Iranian Ambassador in a parcel, and the Deputy PM, Richard Marles, is trying to return the submarine with Don't Ask. It's got a lot of postage on it, but Australia Post stopped sending parcels, so he's going to have to send it, I don't know, courier.
Yeah, maybe through the diplomatic service in a bag.
Yeah, Dippo bag.
Yeah.
David Pope has got the adventures of Dick from Down Under, Down Underland.
My, what a perfectly normal and reliable democratic ally. La, 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 la.
And what's this?
Yeah. It's a Cheshire Cat version of AUKUS, slowly disappearing into the background.
The Vice President, JD Vance, here in the Mad MAGA hat.
Well, I really like Trump here as the Red Queen saying, on with his tariffs.
Yeah.
Queen of Hearts.
Matt Golding has summed up confusion with this whole deal perfectly.
So we pay you billions to get subs we probably won't get, but on the off chance we do, you won't give them to us unless we agree to gift them back to you. And if we do that, we get them. Oh, where do we sign?
Yeah, you already have. Eleri, it's been a great pleasure unpicking events this week. I'll let you do the honours.
Back to you, Mr. Speers.
Thank you, Eleri. Thank you, Mike. Time for some final observations. Two quick things from me. Congratulations, Paul, on winning the Press Gallery Journalist of the Year award at the Midwinter Ball during the week. Very well deserved. And secondly, Labor is at risk of losing its first vote since the election in the Senate this week over aged care. The Coalition, the Greens, crossbenchers teaming up. They're demanding more urgent action on the 87,000 Australians who are now on the wait list for a home care package. So we'll see what happens there. Sam?
I thought it was interesting this week that the Trump administration revealed that they were looking at shortening the visas of not only Australian students, I think it was 240 days, but also journalists. There's no good reason to be doing that. It obviously runs the risk of disrupting, students' stay in the United States, but also in relation to journalists, making them self-censor and concerns about them being kicked out of the US if they gave unflattering coverage.
Paul?
The Prime Minister in Question Time this week backed what he called the right to punt and said that in answer to a question on gambling advertising from Kate Chaney, said that he wanted to break the nexus between sport and gambling, but the sporting codes were already doing that voluntarily. I think Kate Chaney was very confused as to what he meant by that. There's a real go-slow on the gambling reform bill that was initially proposed 2 years ago by the late Labor MP, Peter Murphy. It looks like the government wants to water it down. Let's see how animated the Labor backbench, who feel very strongly about this, are, and whether they're willing to challenge the ascendant Prime Minister on this.
Laura?
At the global level, David, while we're all sitting here, we've got this really interesting group of leaders all heading to China at the moment. The Indian Prime Minister, the Russian President, the North Koreans, and Bob Carr is also going to be there.
And Dan Andrews.
And Dan Andrews. I just think that the world is moving so fast now that there's the big assessment we'll have to make about the Albanese government over the next 6 months in particular is how quickly it's moving. I think to date it's been doing okay, but at some point the question about Taiwan comes into play. I think the Chinese have been prepared to sort of just let the world get distracted by Ukraine and Gaza, but at some point they will make a decision about that, and it'll all get a bit of a tight corner for us.
A bit difficult. No, very good point. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Finally, Trade Minister Don Farrell doesn't mind being called a factional warrior. It's a label the Don has worn for years, but whatever you do, don't call him a liberal factional warrior. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
I read in the Sydney Morning Herald that I'm a factional warrior in South Australia for the Liberal Party. I've been called many things in my life. Anyway, can I absolutely say that is not true?
I want to assure the person who wrote that column that Don Farrell does not hold grudges. He forgets, he forgives, he moves on.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.